Today is Thursday, July 6th, 2023. Welcome to Axiom News Live, where we engage strengths to catalyze change, where we begin with what's strong rather than what's wrong. Here, we lift up the stories of people whose work in the world we have become connected to and care about. I'm your host, Peter Pula. Today, I will be joined by Julia Grady and Heather Watt-Capitaine, both of whom are with 10C Shared Space in Guelph, Ontario. There are a few reasons why the work these two are doing is important. First, they host a shared working space where social entrepreneurs and other active community members can connect and collaborate to create their future together. Second, they are shaping a social finance ecology that includes things like vehicles like community bonds and relational lending. Vehicles like these are important because they are ways for community members to invest in intimate ways that directly create possibility in the communities in which investors reside. Community bonds are a kind of finance that I, for one, would like to see a great many more of, active and at work in the world. Relational lending, on the other hand, is something that's newer to me, so we'll hear possibly a little bit more about that from Heather later in the show. My guess is that each of these vehicles shifts the locus of control and decision-making to more intimate and purpose-led settings, ones in which community members know one another and are making good on their relationships and the materials at hand for community's sake. There's no waiting for someone far away to change or to do anything for us. Rather, these vehicles for community members to reclaim their capacity to create their own well-being are being activated. And here's the thing. We know that there are endless stories about people like Julia and Heather, people we know who are creating the worlds we all wish to inhabit. Imagine what life would be if these were the stories we held most in mind. All we need to do is to look and to see. So with that, I'd like to invite Julia and Heather to join our stream. Welcome, Julia.
Hi, Peter.
And welcome, Heather.
Hello.
Let's just jump right in. I warned you earlier that we'd just like to hear why it was that you said yes to our invitation. So maybe, Julia, we'll hear from you first, if you're willing to say.
Yeah, for sure. I said yes to the invitation mostly because I like being in conversation with Peter. And it's really always great when you meet people who share similar values and thoughts about the world and are curious about how we can change things. So I was really open and to kind of a free-flowing conversation about the present and also about the futures I think we're trying to create.
Right on. Thank you. And we've recently come into a little bit of conversation around some work with friends in Community Living Brant in Brantford around an initiative to build capacity for accessory dwellings. And so we've been playing in that space. And of course, we have a shared friend in Sean Loney. So it's the weaving of relationships is alive and well here. Heather, how about you? Why a yes from you?
Well, that was a good segue to the start of my yes. I won't leave it at because Sean,
Right.
and certainly an invitation from Sean and connections from Sean are always with vibrant and purpose-driven people. So happy to be here for that. And also, Peter, you're elevating and a conversation that needs to be expanded. And I'm happy to contribute to that.
Right on. Okay. Thank you. I like to share that what we'll do today is we'll spend some time in one-on-one conversation with Julia, and then Heather will invite you into the green room to hang out and listen, and then we'll switch places and we'll have a one-on-one conversation with Heather, and then bring you both back towards the end just to reflect on what it is that we explored together. One of the principles of generative journalism is to be completely open to the story that's most alive in the moment. So I know I have some, and presented just a minute ago, some reasons for our bringing you into the circle and into the show, but those may or may not be the stories that are most alive with you. So we don't want to
It's great.
necessarily precondition, co-opt your experience, but to hear what's really alive for you. That can also mean that in the process of discovery, I might ask a question or two for which the answer is not necessarily readily available. So we also welcome silence either on my part while I seek the question I feel I'd most like to ask or would most like to be asked, or response that time given in silence for a response that might come to you. So we feel no need here to evade or invade the silence if it should occur. We're here to be present rather than presenting. All right.
It's
So,
great.
any
Sounds good.
questions about what we're about to embark on? Any reflections? All right. Okay. All right. Well, why don't we start
Nice.
with you, Julia, and Heather. We'll see you back in 15 minutes or so, and
Sounds
we'll
good.
see what unfolds. Okay. So, Julia, the question now is,
Yeah.
what is it that you're working on that you're most excited about these days?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think what I'm most excited about is everything related to social finance that I've been working on. It's around, and it really is around the power of individuals and community to create change that helps strengthen also local communities, and kind of the notion of using your funds in responsible ways locally. That I think is, for me, it connects people to the actual projects, and then also like helps them think about their impact, even as you mentioned earlier, investors. We're all investors regardless of whether we have very limited capital or whether we have lots of capital. So I think that's what's most excited that I'm most excited about. But I also do this in like, you asked a question about what's present for me. It's like we're in really new territory, new times, and I think community and us working together is more important than it has ever been. So I am kind of in those two places of being really excited about work, but carrying a lot of sadness and grief for humanity.
Has there been some recent shift, or have you sort of felt this feeling of our being in a different era, perhaps? Is this something that's recent or heightened for you, or has it been developing over a little while?
I say it's been developing over last 20 years. But it feels a lot warmer now, and it feels I think COVID in a way gave us like a distraction from things that we all know. Like, let's not, retract that. I don't think we all know this, and that's part of what my, I think, sadness is about. But I'm also bolstered at the same time with the ways that we can change things in smaller ways inside community. So that's where most of my focus is.
So social finance is not something that I don't know that it is as well known as an idea
Oh yeah,
as we might like it to be. And part of my sense of social finance and local social finance is that you are creating vehicles whereby people in community are investing directly in
yeah,
activities and community members to create the community they wish to inhabit. And this
yeah,
seems a bit of a counterpoint to what is the norm. I can pick up a phone and find a mutual fund advisor that can place an investment, but that's a little bit, it's a local and social finance seems to be a little less accessible.
Yeah.
But my guess is that you feel that that's the kinds of structures and vehicles you're creating are critically important to local responsiveness to local problems and possibilities.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the social finance will be more prevalent. It'd be like great to live in a world where social finance is actually mainstream finance, but we're far way away from that. But we started within Tensi. I work in this shared community hub that you talked about in the intros, but in 2007, 2008, we started just asking like naive questions around how groups of communities can hold property, and could we, instead of working as like a cooperative, have investors into a property and have the organization still have its autonomy to work as a not-for-profit and do all of its own functions. And the answer to that was to use a community bond as your financing tool, and be able to then connect with individual investors um, to help move the project forward. So that, by asking, I think all of this work is like asking lots of questions around what's possible and what might happen. And in the course of about 2 years, we raised $2.3 million from local community investors who have community bonds with us, but they're also connected to the projects and work. And
Right.
that actually enabled us to purchase and own a property, which lots of times, especially in the arts and with other community organizations, we're in leased or rented or short-term places, and it's hard to cement in and like build a long-term organization when you're always a little bit in flux. And the community bonds offered us an ability to think for longer than one single like 5-year cycle, and to begin thinking in even generations, which I really appreciate.
So what are the kinds of things people experience either as contributors to a bond and as financiers to a degree of local activities? What kinds of things do people tell you about their experience with that kind of investing versus the more conventional styles of
Yeah.
investing?
Yeah, we've had people say that, well, they like that it is something they can see, touch,
Right.
come inside. So it's very
Meet the
tangible, very
people. Yeah.
practical.
Right.
There's a sense of what the work is really about, and obviously, like greenwashing and ESG washing is a thing that is being more talked about around investments right now. So people can, like, they can really experience it and know it and understand it. And then just feeling like that notion of we can work together to accomplish things, like our investors are members into Tensi as well, even if they're not, say, identifying or presenting as change makers, they're still a member of the organization. So it takes kind of like all of us to work on these things together. And then I've had a couple of investors, and we've got this a bit of a flow as investors reach their 5-year cycle, their bonds mature, and then they can either choose to reinvest or exit. And we've had some people who've used their community bonds to save for their house, their home, the first home down payment,
Okay.
like all kinds of beautiful things that have happened. And we've had someone who's just recently purchased a home and has said that once they, get through that, they'll be back, which is like that person is actually thinking of Tensi as an investment vehicle, which is
Right on.
amazing.
Okay.
And that's what we're also trying to build. But I might rewind a little and actually just introduce the community bond. So
Sure.
it
Yep.
is a structure that not-for-profits can use that lets them essentially issue a second mortgage or a first mortgage even against property. And then you go to community saying, hey, I'm going to raise 500 grand, $1 million, and here are what the bonds look like. And essentially it's a little bit like a GIC in terms of it's there's an example. It would be, you'd have a community bond for like $5,000 and it earns this much interest. And these are the outcomes that your organization is working on, whether it's arts, environment, or whatnot. And interest is paid at the end of the bond or during the bond, and you know what your rate of return is, and you have a sense that of what the organization is about. And through that, we were able to raise the $2.5 million from about 140 investors. So it's a decent size community of investors to manage over the long term.
All right. So is there a community of practice or anything like that for folks that structure and set up these community bonds? Because in the conversations we've had, it sounds like there are a variety of ways to structure these things, and there are different elements in
Yeah.
them. It seems to me that having a community bond in place does provide a stable investment vehicle in that, like you said, you can walk through the front door and meet the people who are involved and engaged, and there's a social
Yeah.
ecology around it too. So you're perhaps, would you say that in a community bond, you're a little bit more insulated from the wiles and ways of massive market forces?
Yeah, the wiles and ways of the market forces are different, right? So
Okay.
there, we had a financier kind of tell us, he's like, well, your bonds are counter-cyclical and counter, like they go in ways opposite to what market does. So during
Okay.
COVID, we little 10C are still paying for 3.5 to 4% on our investment. So some of our investors actually were like, came to us during that time, and even the last like year, even saying that, you know, of all of my other investments, like 10C performed, which is amazing. And that's not always the case, right? Because we can't constantly chase like higher and higher and higher interest. But the notion that there's a stable local investment that is backed, our community bonds are backed by real estate. So the value of the property is the thing that if there was a worst case scenario, you know, property gets
Right.
sold and things are
Right.
cashed out. So our investors are pretty happy with like a 3 to 5% rate of return, and the community good. And then
Seems like
you
a
had asked a
reasonable.
question though about community practice. So I
Yep.
think there's beginning to be enough projects that we are getting to know each other. So I think a
Okay.
community practice of people who've done and offered community bonds and people who are considering it. So that's one of the things we try to bring in at 10C is willingly and openly talking to any other not-for-profit who's interested in just wondering how it could work, what the structure looks like, and what's involved. And then locally, our Habitat for Humanity, Gulf Wellington, used, we mentored them a little bit in their community bond offering. So they used it for the first time on some of their current projects, which actually helped them accelerate the pace of their current projects. And that
Right
is
on.
really one of the gifts of local investors helping you do something in the now versus like in the 5 years from now, because we know the pace of change has to like speed up.
To what degree do some of the investors participate in some of the projects and works you're engaged with beyond simply being an investor? Does that
Yep.
happen? Is that, yeah? Okay.
Yeah, for
Okay.
sure. So we have a mix of some investors are, I'll call them more like natural members of 10C, who
Okay.
they're members here. We also have staff and board members who are also investors. So some people are 10C is their community, and then they also invest in their community. And then, but also a little bit more of the investor base are people who are, I'm going to say, like connected to 10C in theme, but not on an everyday basis. So really wanting to be part of seeing their money. A lot of people are looking for more socially responsible places to put their funds. And so 10C is part of that strategy that a decent number of people have as well.
More sustainable and more checkable. You mentioned earlier greenwashing and ESG washing,
Yeah,
whereas that's a little more difficult to pull the wool over people's eyes when they're standing in the front door.
yeah, yeah,
Right. Yeah. 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 Um, you said earlier that, well, I got the sense that you're feeling some urgency
yeah.
around
Kind of
seeing.
lifelong.
What, sorry?
That's a little bit lifelong, but yes.
Okay, all right, okay. But there's something in particular that excites you around, is it social finance with regards to the way the world is at the moment? Is there something that's making that
Yeah.
more alive?
Yeah, I think so because we talk a bunch in the world about our purchasing power being
Yes, yeah,
used to shape the kinds of world we want to be in, and it's exactly the same on investing, right? Like where we're investing is as important as the choices we make every day. So I think that I feel like a lot of optimism around um, a bit more of a values-driven economy,
okay.
and in a values driven economy, you also invest in values driven projects. And I do think that there's going to be all kinds of ways that social financing is real in communities, and you can see it not just building based, like for an art center or a community hub or a kitchen, but funds and all kinds of other like enabling financing for the social sector that can help actually deal with some of the challenges.
Can you speak to some of the possibilities you see locally now that are emerging or underway?
Well, Heather's going to come on and talk about harvest impact, so I'll let her do that.
Okay,
I, social financing really can be used anywhere that you would typically, if you were, that you typically think of going to a bank to rate to finance something. So,
okay.
mm, yeah, I'm gonna, you're gonna have to bring me back in on that one because I lost my thread.
That's all right. That's all right. Well, I was just looking to probe into some of the things you see emerging. I think often we become excited by things because we feel some urgency to see something done, and we have a possible response and a possible answer. So I was just curious about the possibilities you're seeing start to unfold,
Yeah,
and why and why is that calling you in?
yeah.
What is the space that you would occupy in whatever response the community builds?
Yeah, yeah. So I think for me, it's around not-for-profits becoming more enterprising and entrepreneurial in their approaches. And enterprises need financing versus just always like donors and grants,
Right, right,
which are both good. All of them are good across the whole spectrum. But the notion of like say there was a food-based organization that knew they could deliver on bringing more food to people who didn't have food if they had financing. And so it's like building out like what that repayment model looks like or what their business model looks like to enable them to take on some financing. I think as we see more and more of those not-for-profits diving into this, it will just be generative for others to kind of follow suit.
is that sort of catching on as a sort of, what would you call it? It's a bit of a shift for a nonprofit to consider being enterprising
Yeah,
as opposed to the usual seeking for funding or program funding or donors or charitable revenue. What are you seeing unfolding there? I think there could be some cultural resistance possibly because we like to stick with what we know.
yeah.
But then on the other hand, I imagine there are some that are enthusiastic about shaking up the way they interact with the world and the work they're in.
Yeah,
What are you
I
seeing there?
feel like I think it's beginning to shift, and it feels like when you haven't had access to financing, you don't really think about financing. So
Right.
then it's that a bit of a longer term to have more social enterprises and or not-for-profits be in the social enterprising space. But obviously, the federal government has the National Social Finance Fund is unrolling and rolling out, and that will be generative to more not-for-profits um, building models that can take on financing so they can do more work and do the work faster. Like I think that's a 100% given.
All right. So what would you like to see happen next?
In the world. I you know what I'd
You can
like?
answer
I'd
any way you
like,
like, but I had in mind, sort of nearby in your local
yeah.
environs.
Um, I think I'd like, uh, for me, social financing is a way to be part of community and for a way for things to move forward. So I think, for 10C to help other organizations consider how social financing can be part of their mix. And then for ourselves, it's just reaching out to more local investors who are thinking of placing their funds in a different way. We were part of kind of like a bit of a group trade show in Toronto with a number of different other social finance places. And ourselves as individuals, as we're in like divestment mode, um, there need to be more, like if 10C is a product, there needs to be more social finance products that we can all be kind of investing in. So what are the ways that we can connect each other to our projects, I think is some of the work that I'm going to say we in the sector, like people like other not-for-profits do, because it is like one of our second or third questions that, after someone's invested in 10C, it's like, are there other things like this that I could also invest in?
Right,
So
right, right.
what are all the other things? Because we know that the capital we invest has an impact.
So I heard a few things there. One, the notion of reaching out to more investors, but then I also heard reaching out to investors who are already in relationship with you with a view to expanding the field of possibilities that they might
Yeah,
invest in. You
yeah,
also said to bring more social finance products into place. And then I think you also use the word projects. So there might be more investors, more vehicles, different financial products to invest in, as well
yeah,
as projects in which those products could be used to invest. Is that,
yeah.
have I got that
All
right?
of those.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. All right. All right. And at 10C, you really have a lot of members of that ecology already in place and presumably bumping into each other.
yeah, yeah. I
Right.
love
Okay.
that you use the word ecology. And I think with 10C, we think of it as a kind of a portfolio of projects that can support entrepreneurs and community groups in doing their things, whether it's like the shared kitchen or the farmers market or meeting space or the social finance like lending component, or Heather does a bunch of work on supporting groups to understand their theories of change, and we've got some sustainable development goals curriculum. So there's a lot of, we're trying to look at like what are a lot of these things that we can offer to really build that ecosystem and
Okay.
support it or sustain it.
All right. So with more investors, more products, more
Yeah,
projects, that's a lot. Those are a lot of next steps. Great next steps. Um, would you have an ask of community if you had if you could say what you might like, want, or need from community to make those steps successful? What might those asks be?
I think it's just more general engagement and involvement, right? Like we as a society have just been through a time, right? Like the COVID
Mm-hmm.
times.
Mm-hmm.
And as people are coming back into, like, I'm going to call it human form and into community and connecting with each other again, there's a lot that offers, like that is the rich meaning of life,
Right.
community. So I think I'm just, my ask of community and people would be to really deepen our connections and reconnect and think about how we live in our towns or our villages or our cities, and how we do that together in a connected way versus isolated.
Okay. And there might be something of an offer, an invitation in that ask too. So maybe I'll just put that one to you as well. Is there?
Sure.
Do you have an offer that you'd be able or willing to name to the community in which you're engaged?
I think if anyone, if there's like another kind of like person and not-for-profit who's thinking of doing something around social finance, reach out to me, and I'm always happy to have a call, wander on that path with anyone. And similarly, if there's anyone interested in building physical space, and how that actually happened, like the Tennessee story is pretty zany. Like it's not that, like, it's none of this work is for the like light of spirit, I can say, but a lot of these things are totally possible. So I'm always happy to connect with anyone around any of that.
Beautiful. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Um, we can wrap up there, but maybe I'll just have you. Is there anything else you would like to say, or if there has been any meaning made for you during our short conversation together, what might it have been?
For me, I think it's the word ecology. Like, we live on a planet that we, we need to just consider in better ways.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Peter.
Beautiful. Thank you, Julia. We'll invite you into the green room and hear what Heather and I explore, and then we'll bring you back in 15 or 20 for a closing round. All right. Thank you, Julia. All right. Heather, welcome. There we go. There we go. So, what's alive for you now?
Oh my gosh. So much, often if Julia and I have an opportunity to speak to this, this was a really great experience just to be listening, because usually we would be jumping
Right.
in. So yeah, I would say a lot that jumped out for me is around accelerating the pace.
Okay.
And I think one of your first questions was what excites me most, and a little bit of a background that I gave you is that I was on the board of 10C, and at one point I chaired the board through this transition from what was 3,000 square feet down the street to this now 15,000 square foot building that we were able to activate with the sale of community bonds. And
it does sound a bit zany.
It is zany. It is. And in 2021, I have moved into this staff role. And so definitely what excites me, don't get me wrong, governance excites me. It really, and I'm not being sarcastic, it does. I enjoy
I hear you. It
that
can
role.
be very exciting. Done well.
Yeah. And
all done right, it can be a blast. Exactly.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And nothing about 10C happens at a small pace, which is what inspired me to come into this staff role, is that, the levers of change that need to be pulled, we find them and we work to pull them as quickly as we can and effectively as we can. So that's what excites me about being here.
So is there a bit of a flow experience in that, Heather? Because we hear a lot about systems change and this idea that you can put your hands on the levers of power and pull it and something will change. But in larger systems, I guess, or the more distant systems, we hear the talk, but we don't actually see it occur. Whereas what you and Julia have been involved in strikes me as you very much are able to act and then receive very quickly some feedback from life itself saying, hey, this is taking hold, this is working, this is happening. And the Csikszentmihalyi talking about flow, I mean, to have feedback from the system in which you're working, the ecology is part of what makes for the excitement. You do something and you suddenly have something to respond to and the ability to do so. It doesn't strike me that you have that so much in far away projects, but in the kind of intimate settings you're in, you're more likely to feel that in a more real sense.
Yeah, short answer is yes to all of that. And it's not, happening organically because of where we are. There's a lot of hard work
Right.
and,
Right.
People working, people having the awareness, people being in the conversations that need to be happening, which is something else that excites me about the place of where 10C is at. Certainly when I was on the board and we were this small organization working mightily, I wanted 10C to have seats at the tables that could affect change, and more
Okay.
we do
Okay.
have that. And so where that like translates into what's exciting, Julia touched on it a little bit in terms of the consulting and the mentorship around helping other community organizations work into the social finance realm, or the community investing realm through community bonds. That's very exciting. Again, we need 100%. We need more people doing this to elevate the conversation.
Right.
It's not that we want to have exclusivity on community bonds. We
Right.
don't.
Right.
So that's very loud and exciting in the space for us. A few things about the community bonds in the beginning of our project. We sold community bonds on a promise, essentially, of the impact. We had some evidence of the impact we were making, but here's the impact that investing in this will make, because we needed those bonds to be able to be in the space to affect the change
Right.
and work on all the projects that we're working on. And as is evidenced by our renewal rate, which is close to 80%, we have more than fulfilled on that promise, and more so, and more, right? And I used to joke in the beginning, people invested in Julia because certainly her word of being able to fulfill on that, you could trust Julia, and people had the faith in her, frankly, tenacity to fulfill on that and to lead a team to be able to do that. So that is absolutely the case. And you also in your conversation mentioned accessibility. Our bonds provide an accessible point of investment for people. Again,
Right.
to use the 80%, but 80% of our bond investors have household incomes of less than $100,000. So it's a space to invest and see the social impact, be connected to the social impact, and which then is a lever or a pathway to be more connected to your community. Something else that Julia touched on was the ask of community. And yes, we've been through a time, and even before the time of going through the pandemic, I think community service organizations and people working in community are aware of all of the spaces in which community connection were lessening, right? Whether community connection was diminishing because of, whether it be that churches, they used to provide that, and are as many people engaging in churches for that. Like, where are those community centers? Where is like that? Where's the square that the town is meeting at? And that is something that very much excites me about 10C. We are a remarkable front porch for community to come and meet and to learn about what's happening in the community, to access, whether it be through Harvest Impact or other activities, to access what they might need to animate their projects through what's happening here. And so that's all. These are all of the points that I probably would have jumped in on, and
Right.
I would have yes-anded
So,
Julia to the
right, for sure. Well, I want to, maybe I can go back to a little bit. You said that when the bond was being first issued, you felt that the promise Julia embodied and carried was really important. And earlier today, you introduced me to the phrase relational investing. And I mean, are those two things very related? Because I know in our work, we're seeing in convening community conversations and dialogue and community based responses, that it often takes a character
Mm-hmm.
that becomes a bit of a coalescing factor. So somebody that people are in relationship with, who they trust, and then that person very much does carry the spirit and the promise of a particular project. Is that a dynamic similar to what you experienced with the issue of the bond with Julia, and is that a factor in the work you do around relational financing?
I would say yes to the question around the bond. That
Right,
certainly, if linchpin is the word, or
right,
yes, Julia did provide all of that in terms of people's relationship to Julia, and then how that expanded into their relationship into 10C, and then the network of conversations that happened beyond that would
right.
then lead other people into our bond ask. So I'm going to back up a bit and talk about relational lending. And you may have heard of character-based lending, or
Okay.
so in terms of what we're doing at Harvest Impact is, again, we're providing loans, and the idea of a relational lender is that we are in relationship with our lendees, and where that can support someone is um, whether perhaps they might not have access to traditional forms of lending
Mm-hmm.
for whatever
Mm-hmm.
reason that might be. Maybe it's a credit
Sure.
score. Maybe it is they're an equity deserving individual that has faced barriers when they go to a bank. Whatever it might be, we enter into a conversation and go through all of those pieces together. The other piece about being in relationship is, while we do have an application process, and again, to your question about what's exciting me, is building curriculum and supports in what we call the
Mm-hmm.
Enterprise Support Office of Harvest Impact. So certainly beyond this, I've been an entrepreneur my whole life. This is this is like my first big job, because I've always worked for myself. And in that, and in the businesses that I've had, I have gone through some mentorship and sort of incubator type experiences. And so
Right.
some have been great and some not so great. And what I am excited about bringing to Harvest Impact is supporting people and meeting people where they're at in the supports that they need, and whether that means scaling their business or not scaling their
Sure. Yep.
business, right?
Yep.
What is it that you
Mm-hmm.
need to fulfill on your project, and how are we working together to support that? So whether it be through providing you with the background on what a balance sheet should look like, which seems really basic to some, and to some others it's not. And or maybe it's making the right introductions for you, and just knowing and getting updates and learning learning everything about you, the lendee, as well as your project. And um, so we recently implemented a program where we supported 10 different social enterprises. A lot of them were in the um, regenerative agriculture and food waste realm. And what I loved about what we did is that we really provided them with the advising they needed. And the request of the advisors, we have a team of 30 advisors that we would match with them, was that they weren't talking at our participants. Certainly in incubated programs, that has been my experience. Here are all the things
Okay.
that you should do, and here are maybe some
Right.
tools to
Right.
do it. But just really that our advisors are working alongside and fulfilling and getting to the outcomes together with our participants. So really having some very effective supports in place in
So you've got
addition to the lending.
all right.
Mhm.
So you've got the relationship piece, plus the
Mhm.
finance piece, plus some structures and scaffolding for the entrepreneurial exercise. So you got this whole. You said earlier that you're interested in seeing the acceleration of things. And from what I've heard from both you and Julie, it sounds to me that there are now things possible that weren't possible before. Maybe I could ask you to speak into that. What's possible, given what you and your colleagues at 10C and the participants in it and investors have laid the groundwork for? What do you think's possible now that wasn't possible before?
That's a very big question, Peter. It's like,
fair enough. I did warn you.
yeah. So it's, I mean,
Maybe some first guesses would be all right too.
yeah, I would say, yeah, like what isn't possible? Like
Okay.
Yeah, it is. I think possibility is really at the heart of what we're doing here inside, those spaces that Julia mentioned around where there is some sadness and grieving. But we don't stop at that. And then what? And what is the work that needs to be
It feels
done?
it feels to me like you're making it possible for the community to reclaim its capacity to create its own well-being.
Yeah. Yeah, I think or maybe that capacity was never gone. We're just reawakening rather than reclaiming. That it
Well, I can't remember if
is
it's you said or Julia said, but some of the things that you've started weren't happening organically.
right.
So there was enough of the life world that had been sort of forgotten or was paying attention to that to insert some of these life-giving generative activities and structures took something of an intervention, I guess. And so you've made those interventions, and now life is seeming to be blooming and blossoming in many different spaces, thanks to the structures, the relationships, and the cultures that you've been building.
Yeah, and I think it becomes kind of exponential. So I want to use one of the examples of someone that we've worked with, Jen at All Sorts Acres. So All Sorts Acres, she's a sheep farmer, and little known to me, and I'm sure most Canadians, but only 3% of our wool shear is actually viable for textile in Canada,
Okay.
just because it's dirty or whatever
Okay.
it's rough
Okay.
because of the seasons. And so with some funding from Harvest Impact, Jen was able to purchase something called a wool pelletizer, and she's created like a phosphorus-free. It absorbs water, so you can water less. It's a great fertilizer, and it's pelletizing sheep
Okay.
wool. And Jen is a great ambassador for what's happening at Harvest Impact, because she doesn't just speak to the possibility that she was able to build into and build her business, and now other farmers are interested, but she said, like, all of these things were here. This idea of a circular economy, this idea of eliminating waste was here, and it's so heartening to her to have a group that is funding that. So she knew of that possibility, but having the sort of not sort of, but having like the supports of an enterprise support office and people that are funding ventures, it really, I think it inspired her to an nth degree, because there's this community that is working together toward anything is possible, and what are the solutions that we need. And so that excites me, just
Well, I was
like that.
privileged to host a dialogue under the calling question that had something to do with what if we could unleash our deepest gifts and strengths to cultivate a local life-giving oasis. And it feels to me that that's exactly what you are managing to do.
Yeah, if I now I wanted to, like, what's a reason that, again, I came out of a governance role into a team role. It is, and to really be able to be in action, to really feet on the ground, be communicating with, meeting with the people that walk through the doors here every day. This space is alive with people living into possibility and their possibilities, and then the opportunity to make people aware of possibilities and who they are as a possibility
Right,
as
right.
well, right?
Right,
That
right, right.
is yeah, it is really great.
Beautiful. All right.
Mm,
Why don't we bring
sure.
Julia back? But before then, what meaning, if any, was made for you during our short 20 minutes together?
Uh, really, this is another conversation of possibility, that this
Mm,
exists,
mm,
certainly. And again, I think I said it at the beginning, but that we're amplifying. It's not our conversation. It's not 10C's
right.
conversation. It's not yours. It is the world's conversation.
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm. Beautiful.
I know I said we're a community of conversation. So the more we have, the better. So definitely have made meaning of that. And I also, you used the word ecology, and I thought it was a great, it stood out for me in terms of even just the messaging of what we are doing, and some opportunity. So
Beautiful.
it's
Okay.
great.
Thank you. All right. Why don't we have Julia back, Yvonne? Okay. So, reflections on our two or three conversations so far. What's struck you?
Hmm. I see Heather every day almost, so it's
Right.
always fun to it is fun to be in the other rooms. I think the main thing is that this notion of and we didn't enunciate it like this, but community wealth building,
Mm.
Mm,
like
mm-hmm.
of in a weird way, like going back to times when we cared for each other as humans, and we thought of our communities as local economies and local ecologies
Mm.
together.
I'm wondering from, is there by any chance anyone in your 10C community that is in the media business? And like, I just think about the richness of the story and all the
Mm.
stories in what you're doing. Um, like I said when we were speaking, Heather, it feels to me like what you're cultivating and what you're already living in is really quite the community oasis. It doesn't seem
It,
to me
it
that this is a necessarily um, a usual experience for people. Like you really have developed
Mhm.
something incredible that suggests to me the possibility of the good life for everybody, built by community. This really, to me, it's very
Mm.
much a beacon of.
yeah,
We could
Um,
have a daily, like we could have a 10C reality show in a heartbeat.
Absolutely, that's what I'm wondering about. Like, where
Yeah.
do I go to just take in all the stories
Mm.
about what's happening there?
Mhm.
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because, and really, if in a weird way, like in a way, like if these walls could talk, like so many different
Mm,
relationships happen because the people are here, and it's a little bit of a tendency being drawing together people with fairly like with a strong values base. I think is one of the ways that helps open that up. But I was just reflecting a bit on, we have a host who and we have volunteers who host the front entrance. So they just welcome people in. You sign in. They answer some general questions, but a lot of general conversations and meetings and gatherings just happen at the front desk. So this new host who was really new to 10C just um, kind of like had the like this osmosis experience of seeing what we were like by the way that people who
right.
weren't staff were like to each other and what was happening. And there was this like gradual progression of interest in, well, what is this place? And then that person became like one of our major community bond investors, which is a really interesting and nice way to enter community and to experience it. And I know this place got me is well, it's the thing that has gotten me through the times of life that are hard. And isn't that actually what community is meant to do? Like, who are our communities of?
So there must be a
people?
tremendous sense of health and well-being in these circles then.
And/or collective angst. It's a bit of both, right?
A
Like
bit of
having
both, eh?
some
Okay.
freedom to really feel what is
The feels.
like real.
Yeah.
All the feels.
Mhm.
All the feels. All the
Mhm.
feels. Okay. All right. Shall we call ourselves closed for now then? Is there anything else that seems to want to be spoken before we go?
Yeah, I think the only thing I would like to add is that it is permission for everything here. Like there is we're not, uh, just glossing over the realities of the world with a beatific smile on our faces, right? Right? We're not doing that, and but it is living inside those realities and being in action, and living into the possibility. So feeling the feels and then being able to be in action about them, I think is probably like the balm we all need.
Yeah.
Well, and there's tremendous competency in what you're doing. It's not just the feels left without the support of competency, and you've built the structures and the capabilities one step at a time. To possibilities don't just come about. It takes work and it takes imagination and creativity, and you've done it all. Brilliant, beautiful. Well, thank you both for the work that you are doing, and of course, we didn't intend during our time together to tell the whole story of 10C. You've got great websites, so we pointed people to those so that if you want to know more about the backstory and what's shaking at 10C Shared Space, and with how they are unfolding and unfolding the arts of the social finance ecology, you can head over there to learn more, and hopefully we can have you and or some of your colleagues back in the future to check in again on what's alive in the moment. So with that, I'll thank you both, and we'll
Thank
maybe
you.
see you in the green room afterwards. But with that, we'll
You
call our
bet.
time together closed. Thank you, Heather,
Thanks,
and
Peter.
thank you,
Thank you.
Julia.
That was
All
a lot
right.
of fun. Thank you.
Betcha. All right, so we'll say that is our show for today. Next week, we are looking forward to having both Sean Loney, who is, of course, an Axiom News Media Collaborative member through Encompass Co-op's engagement with us. Sean has just been traveling around, and we are going to have next week both Sean and Lawrence Lewis of One Feather. But we also have a clip to share with you by way of a little bit of promo for next week's show. So Yvonne, if you want to bring in the live, what would you say live? It was Sean on the ground with Lawrence, exploring some possibilities.
Hello, Axiom News folks. It's Sean Loney here. I'm at the Social Enterprise Center in Winnipeg, and I'm with Lawrence Lewis. We've had a wonderful visit today. We're outside the Aki Foods and Aki Energy offices. Lawrence, what are you doing here? Tell us about your company.
Yeah, my name is Lawrence Lewis. I'm from the Wee-Wee Nation on Vancouver Island. My indigenous name is Kalis, and I'm the CEO and founder of One Feather. We're an indigenous technology company based out of Victoria, British Columbia, but work with nations all across Canada. And our focus is providing solutions around indigenous digital credentials and using those credentials to unlock access to entitlements, services, and benefits through all levels of government and your First Nations. Everything from banking solutions to voting in your upcoming election to accessing new status cards or renewing your status cards and everything in between. Pleasure to be here today and chat with you with Aki Energy and Aki Foods.
So that's super cool. So for First Nations, that are moving towards sovereignty, of course they all are, verifying citizenship basically,
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
and having really their own banking system through One Feather's solution. We're going to have a longer conversation with Lawrence and One Feather next week, but in the meantime, what's your web address?
Yeah, www.onefeather.ca. Check us out. There's some great videos and links there to learn more about us.
Back to you, Peter. Thanks.
All right, we're looking forward to having both Lawrence and Sean with us live next week on Thursday at 2 o'clock. Of course, we air every week at that time. In the meantime, if you'd like to follow along with us, you can subscribe below, or you can find us at axiomnews.com, Twitter, and Facebook. That's our show for today. I'm your host, Peter Pula. Thank you for listening.